And even though it wasn't enough to change the mind of the decision, oy vey, prominent African-American literary and artistic movement, which was, let me just rephrase that, okay? Yeah. Hello, my beautiful blossoms, and welcome to my channel. I'm so glad you're here. I have no idea how you found me, but I am so glad you did. If you like what you see and you want to get silly with it and talk about creatives and their lives and doing a little bit of makeup and maybe doing a few reviews on makeup, as well as just talking about creativity in general, hitting on entrepreneurship as well, because I am a small business owner, and your support would mean so much. So if you can hit that notification, I put out videos twice a week. We aim for Mondays and Fridays, but sometimes, life happens and it does not work out. But generally there's 2 videos a week. One, Makers and Makeup, where we talk about an awesome entrepreneur or a creator. And then on Fridays or after that, we make videos with makeup, maybe tutorials or reviews, or just get ready and chat with me. Haven't done those yet, but you can see I can talk, right? So do like Emily D. Baker says, do the YouTube-y things, and I am going to see you in this video later. So let's get right into talking about Augusta Savage. Hello, my beautiful blossoms. Welcome to my channel where we talk about makeup, entrepreneurship, art, and all things creative. And today we're going to talk about a wonderful artist for our Makers and Makeup Monday, and her name is Augusta Savage. And she was savage. She was pretty amazing, incredible lady. So excited to share her life story with you, hopefully to give you some inspiration. If you're feeling down, to know that there's always hope out there, and I am super duper psyched. So let us begin with the primer, as we do. Remember, you have to prime if you want your makeup to look good, especially under the eyes. We are talking about Sculptor, as I mentioned. Her name is Augusta Savage, and she was one of the leading artists during the Harlem Renaissance. And it was a she was a very influential person during that time, and we will talk about that in a little bit. So she was born on February 29th, 1892, and she was born in Florida in a town called Green Cove Springs, and her given name was actually Augusta Christine Fells. And she was part of a really large family. She was the 7th of 14 children, and she began making art as a kid. She was a little tot when she started using natural clay that she found by her house, and she started making like little figurines, farm animals, little ducks. It was really cute, and she really loved it. And sometimes she'd even skip school to just like play in the mud and create those really unique little sculptures of hers. And sometimes she also got caught and got into a lot of trouble. Her dad was a Methodist minister, and he really didn't approve very much of her artistic inclinations, let's say. He thought it was sinful, and he just thought that activity was a waste of time, and he really wanted her to stop. And Savage even said during an interview that her father almost whipped all the art out of her. But we're all glad that he didn't. And it's not like it was done with malice. People lived very different lives back then, so there's no judgment here. In 1907, she was only 15 years old, and she married her first husband. Whoops, give it away. She had more than one. She married her first husband, and his name was John Moore. And the following year, she had a daughter, her only daughter. Her name was Irene. And tragically, a year after her daughter's birth, her husband passed away. So then in 1915, the family ended up moving to a different part of Florida. They actually moved to West Palm Beach, and she had a new challenge when they moved. She was not able to find any clay. She wasn't able to create, and it was really a hole in her heart because she was really good at it, and she missed it. She really missed it. So around that time in 1915, she was 23 years old, and she ended up marrying another man. This was her second husband, and his name was James Savage, and that's the name that she ended up having for the rest of her life. So he was a carpenter, and unfortunately their marriage did not work out, and they got divorced in 1920. At that time, she did not sculpt anything for almost 4 years because of that problem that she had. She couldn't find any natural clay. But then one day she was driving by a place and she noticed like a lot of pottery, and she found a potter not far from where she lived, and she walked in, and she was just so excited, and he ended up giving her 2 giant buckets of clay, which really just made her day. And from that clay, she ended up modeling a group of little figurines that she entered in the West Palm Beach County Fair. And guess what? No, really, guess what? She won. So when she entered, her work was so well received that she ended up winning a prize. It was really like a huge self-esteem boost for her. And she was also really supported by the fair's superintendent. His name was George Curry, and he really encouraged her to study art, besides all the racist crap that was going on during those times. And she really that really stuck with her, and she continued pursuing her artistic talents. So because her figurines were awarded a special prize and also a ribbon of honor, she was really encouraged by her success, and she decided to move to a different part of Florida, Jacksonville, where she was hoping to earn some more support and get some commissions. And she mostly concentrated on sculpting portraits of busts of really prominent Black African Americans in the community. And unfortunately, she was not able to really make a lot of money doing that, or from what I understand, she wasn't able to afford a living, let's say. So she ended up making another move in the early 1920s. After that failed attempt, she ended up moving to New York. Now, New York was a whole other world, and she, really struggled financially. She was trying to pursue her dreams, and it was difficult. I mean, just being a creative, I feel like, is a difficult task to be able to support yourself and make a name for yourself. And during that time, being an African American creator must have been 1,000 times more difficult because of the racial injustices that were going on. But in any case, she actually got into Cooper Union, which was an art school, and she got into it on a full scholarship, which was also pretty darn amazing. And all of her living expenses paid. Fantastic. She excelled in that school. She finished all her coursework in 3 years instead of 4. And while she was in Cooper Union, she also had, an experience that really is going to greatly influence how her life path, I suppose. So in 1923, she married another man. She fell in love with another man. His name was Robert Poston, and this was her third husband, and he was an associate of Marcus Garvey. Unfortunately, she has like really crap luck in men. He passed away. So her husband died in 1924, which is basically a year after they got married. And in 1923, that same year that she got married, she applied for a special summer program to study in France through her school, and she was rejected. So she took the rejection as a real call to action, and she sent letters to all the local media and all the, well, not all, but you know, a lot of the local media and newspapers. And her story actually made headlines in a lot of the newspapers. And even though it wasn't enough to change the mind of the committee that voted that she not be accepted to that program, it certainly brought attention to her cause. One committee member, as a matter of fact, his name was Herman McNeil. He really regretted the ruling and actually invited Savage to further study in her craft in his studio in Long Island. So Savage soon really started making a name for herself as a portrait sculptor, which is kind of what she wanted to do from the very beginning when she tried to create the sculptures of the famous African Americans back in Jacksonville. So she created a few sculptures on commission, and her work from that time really it blossomed and included busts of such prominent African Americans as Marcus Garvey. So in any case, in the early 20th century, basically New York Harlem neighborhood, it underwent a huge historical transformation, and during that time it was described as the Harlem Renaissance. And what happened was the area thrived as a cultural hub for African Americans, and it culminated the most unprecedented advancement in arts, literature, and music. And while it was initially intended to be like a spiffy kind of high class or upper class white neighborhood, because they had so many housing that was not occupied, it attracted African Americans to move in because the apartments were just sitting empty. So in the beginning, just a handful of African Americans families from other parts of the city filled these empty spaces, and then other African Americans followed suit. So this made the neighborhood particularly appealing to all the Southern asylum seekers, basically people who were trying to run away from the really segregated South, and they fled. They fled to Harlem section of Manhattan, which only covers about 3 square miles. It drew nearly 175,000 of African American, and it was the biggest concentration of African Americans in the world. So cool. So anyway, all kinds of creators were attracted to that area, to Harlem. And, from unskilled laborers to educated middle class, they shared a lot of their common experiences through of slavery and emancipation and oppression. And they were determined to create their own identity as free people. In 1929, Augusta was awarded a Julius Rosenwald Fellowship. Now, why, you say? I'll tell you. Because she created a sculpture and she named him Gammon, and that was earlier in her career. And it was a small sculpture, and it won her the scholarship to travel Europe, which is this Julius Rosenwald Scholarship. And some sources suggest that the sculpture was inspired by like a homeless boy that she saw on the street, while others are saying that it was actually her nephew, Ellis Ford. And the French word gamin, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing, I have no idea how to say it, means street urchin. And the figure's wrinkled shirt and the cap, it would all emphasize his impoverished appearance, and the child's expression on his face was like so much wiser than his years, basically suggesting that he's seen a lot of hardships, a lot things that kids should not be seeing. And the title, may have reflected how Savage herself felt as a young artist in Europe, and she was struggling to make ends meet even after achieving success. Savage got her opportunity to study abroad, and she spent time in Paris, and she exhibited her work there in the Grand Palais. Don't know how to pronounce that either. And after that, she actually ended up earning her second fellowship. And the second fellowship also was, it was to continue her study in Europe for another year. And she won another scholarship, I think at the same time, but it was just a different scholarship. It was by Carnegie Foundation, and it was a grant actually, and it allowed her to travel to other European countries. So that was freaking cool. She returned to the United States while, the Great Depression was going on, and it was in full swing. And in 1932, she got a portrait commission, but they were really hard to come by. And she basically began teaching art and established the Savage Studio of Arts and Crafts. And then in middle of the decade, she became the first Black artist to join what was known as the National Association of Women's Painters and Sculptors. Is that enough? Might be enough. I always end up doing my eyes purple. I have no idea why. I mean, I know why, but I really have to it's either blue or purple. I don't know. So she became one of the first African American women to be accepted into the National Association of Women Painters and Sculptors. And she assisted in a lot of the American artists, just, searching out for them and recruiting them. Do you recruit in a school? I guess you do. And including Jacob Lawrence and Norman Lewis. And, she lobbied the Works Project administration to help other young artists find work during this financial crisis. I mean, artists always are the ones, that suffer, because as soon as things go awry, the first thing that goes is all the creative stuff, because people don't find that to be as important as, let's say, I don't know, eating. In 1935, there was a creation of a very important organization that really helped African Americans to thrive. And the name of it was the Harlem Artists Guild. And it was established by Augusta Savage and an artist by the name of Charles Alston, and also a muralist by the name of Elba Lightfoot. And it was the Harlem Artists Guild, and it intended to give a voice to the neighborhood of African American artists. So in 1941, even though the guild only lasted like a few years, it was still very important. I'll let you know in a minute why. It really achieved the goals laid out in its constitution, which is basically to encourage young talented artists and to foster relationships between artists and the public. So, it wanted to improve artists' standards of living and their opportunities. It basically the goal was to give these artists the chance to make it and give them those connections so they would be able to be successful. And it also led to, and this is the part that I was telling about earlier, why it was important even though it only lasted a few years, it led to the creation of Harlem Community Arts Center, which it's an incredible space, which was established through the Federal Arts Project, and it was funded federally, giving scholarships and monetary donations and creating that connection and giving the resources for the artists to be able to thrive and explore and, you know, do their artsy things. So in 1937, her career actually took a pivot. She was appointed as the first director of the Harlem Community Arts Center, and then she was commissioned by the New York World's Fair to create a piece. And that was the World's Fair of 1939. So yeah, she was super excited, and she actually decided to create a beautiful piece, and it was inspired by the African American music. So she wanted, the goal of the fair was to create a sculpture symbolizing the musical contributions of the African American. So she helped found the Harlem Artists Guild, and led to the very directorial position at the Harlem Community Center, at the WPA's Community Center. And she decided to create a harp. Her sculpture piece was very large, and it was inspired by James Weldon Johnson's poem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And the harp was Savage's largest work and her biggest commission. And she took a leave of absence from her position as a director for 2 years. And then when she came back, guess what? They gave away her job. So that really devastated her. And to add to that, she also, that beautiful piece that she created was created out of clay, and because she didn't have money to make it from bronze, it takes a lot of effort and money, mostly money, I suppose. She wasn't able to do that. So after the World's Fair closed, so many of the art pieces that were created were just destroyed. So that beautiful piece, hers was one of them. That beautiful piece that she's created was destroyed. It was just such a pretty piece too. So what she did was she cast it in plaster, and she finished it to resemble black basalt. And the harp was exhibited in the courtyard of the Contemporary Art Building, where it received a lot of acclaim. The sculpture depicted a group of 12 stylized black singers in graduated height, and that symbolized the strings of the harp. And then the soundboard was formed by the hand and the arm of God, and the kneeling man holding the music represented the foot pedal. I mean, it was massive, and it was beautiful. So like I mentioned before, no funds were available to cast the harp in bronze, so it was basically discarded. When I read that, I literally wanted to cry. That is horrible. So when she returned to Harlem, to the Harlem Community Arts Center, and realized that her position has been assumed by somebody else, it really just frustrated her, and it forced her to pretty much end her career. She ended up moving from New York City, and the Harlem Community Arts Center closed during World War II anyway, because there was no federal funds available to keep it going. So in 1939, she made an attempt to kind of reestablish her art center in Harlem, and she opened up something that she called a Salon of Contemporary Negro Art. But unfortunately, that did not really do well. Again, it was a really difficult time. You know, people weren't making a lot of money. And she was also a founder and director of a small gallery that was like, it was one of a kind gallery in Harlem. And unfortunately, that also closed. So, and again, why did it close? There were no funds available. So important to support artists. I can't bring enough attention to it. I actually have an idea on how to help, and I'm working all of that out in my head. So we will be talking about that at a later time. So yeah, so that closed, and she was devastated. She was devastated. There's no other way of putting it. And in 1945, she was depressed by the loss of her job. She was depressed by the collapse of, both of the attempts of her being a successful artist. Well, she was successful, but making money. She felt bummed about that. So Savage pretty much retreated to a small town called Syracuse. It's in New York. It's in the Catskill Mountains, and she found her daughter, reestablished a relationship with her, and pretty much lived with her daughter. She still was involved in teaching kids how to, encouraging kids and teaching them art. She did summer classes. She even wrote books, tried different ventures, but unfortunately, nothing really panned out for her. She wasn't, I think once she left New York and, after she really gave it all to try and start her gallery, and once that didn't work out, I think she really just felt defeated, and it's just so sad. So she ended up living with her daughter. The good part is that she really reestablished that relationship between her and her only daughter, and she visited New York occasionally. Again, she produced a few portrait sculptures of tourists, and she explored the interest of writing children's stories. That was like her other hobby, and she even did a little bit of murder mysteries, which is right up my alley. I love murder mysteries. Whoop, whoop. None of them were published. But in 1962, Savage moved back to New York, and she died in pretty much relative obscurity on March 26, 1962. And she died because she was battling cancer for quite a few years. She was all but forgotten for a while, but after her death, but then she was remembered. She had her work shown in several museums, including the Brooklyn Museum. She had lectures talking about her life and her influence on encouraging young Black artists. She is not forgotten, and I think that is incredible. People go and they can see her work right now. I believe it is on display. I don't remember exactly where, so I'm going to link all of that information. And I watched several lectures about her, as well as it was like a children's book that was written that even though it was for kids, I was like, it was interesting to me. And I found her to be a very inspirational person, especially if you think about not so much where, but if you think about when she grew up and during the time when it was so difficult to be an African American. And I am pretty much done with my look. I have dramatic eyes today. They're playful, but I feel like we don't need a lot of color for the lips with this look. Not that it really matters. These videos are really not about the makeup at all. They just kind of keep me busy. And otherwise, there would be like squirrel constantly, because I have an attention span of a bumblebee. So I hope you enjoyed the story of the beautiful artist Savage, and I think she was Savage. Let's add a little sparkle to the lippy. We're not gonna even line them today. We're gonna be crazy with ourselves. We're just gonna go nuts. Oh, I love this. It's so nice. It's plumping too. Ooh. Okay, nice. And the sun did go down. This time I was smart enough to turn on my ring light. So as the daylight faded, the artificial light kept us going. I loved learning about her. I hope you loved learning about her.